Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disaster recovery, business continuity, security, COVID, well-being, anything that can help you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. Let's jump straight into today's topic. We're going to talk about DORA, and I don't mean the Explorer. I'd like to welcome back to the show today someone who's been on the show a few times now. So I think this is episode 3 or 4, if I'm not mistaken. But I'd like to welcome back today Luke Bird. Luke, welcome back.
Hi, Alex. It's really good to be chatting with you again. I was just thinking to myself when you were going through your standard blurb that you should maybe do like a sound overplay for the, Chesney Hawks, I Am the One and Only, like that song. I don't know if you know that song. You should just play a little soundbite of that as you say, I am the only Alex Fullick on LinkedIn. Press that soundbite, add some razzmatazz to your intro.
Sometimes it does feel a little bit robotic. It's like, I know I've got to say the same thing, introduce myself, but
there definitely is only one Alex Fullick in my life, that's for sure.
Thank goodness. I'm probably
spend a lot of time on my we have a TV in our living room that's is meant to be like a picture frame that turns into a TV, and you've been on my wall far too many times, I think.
I'm not sure that's a good thing, or maybe it is, I don't know.
Oh, it is. It's a great thing. I love it. Well, no, it's nice to be here. Thank you for bringing me on, mate. I appreciate it.
Great. Well, I'm glad to have you back. So as I said, we're going to talk about DORA. And
yeah,
I got to be honest, when I heard about DORA, I didn't even know what it was. Because like most people, as soon as you hear the name DORA, you're thinking the kids' animated series, Dora the Explorer. So, and obviously that's not what it is. So can you tell us what DORA actually is?
All right, well, without going like really boring people to death, I mean, on paper, and I'm sure a lot of people that might listen to this, but why are we talking about this and why should we be interested? It's just another piece of like regulation, upcoming regulation and legislation in a particular jurisdiction or region, and it covers a lot of what's already being done. That's how you would look at it. But basically, DORA stands for the Digital Operational Resilience Act, and it's an effort that's been undertaken for a few years now in the running, a lot of discussions and a lot of consultation, but it's a recently agreed upcoming piece of legislation which is going to mandate the financial services sector within Europe to adhere to some new set of standards that will be coming in the very near future. I've almost bored myself in that description. And if anyone's like me that watches this, I'll split character and I'll be the guy on the couch and I'll ask the question, why the hell should I care about this? I don't work in Europe. I don't work for a bank or anything like that. Why is it important? And I think the reality is I can blow those points out of the water because you don't have to work in financial services anymore to have downstream like sort of ripple effect onto how it impacts yours.
That's true. Years ago, I worked for a company when Sarbanes-Oxley came out in the US,
right.
And we looked at it and we said, okay, well, it's all for US, so we don't have to worry about it. Well, months went by, and all of a sudden we were starting to get queries about it. Hey, are you following this? Do you have this? And we're kind of going, what are you talking about? And it came to light that it now impacts us, even though we're not in the US. And it's obviously impacted companies, throughout Europe and Canada, obviously the US. But we were one of those people who thought, that's a US standard. We don't have to worry about it. It's not going to impact us. And then, as you just said, DORA is going to do the same thing. I think it will.
It is, but even more so because historically, you're right, absolutely. There'll be a piece of, like me in Europe, when I've worked for global banking now for years in a couple of different organizations, and a piece of, like, I don't know, US regulation. This is because we're a group and we have intra-group operations and we have global providers of particular products and services. It really does, for the banking world, it really does make a difference. But the reason why I think it's very important now is that, first of all, the slight difference in this regulation that's come in is that it's broadening its scope to critical ICT third-party providers and auditors and people like that. So they've broadened the scope of who it's going to hit in terms of the financial ecosystem generally. They've put everybody who deals with any sort of finance, payment cards, insurance, everything. They're doing that. That's fine. But actually, I think the stat that I'd read was that the financial ecosystem, the financial services sector, they are, what is it, 1/5 of the consumers of ICT globally. And
ICT, for those who may not know what it stands for, is
information communication technology. So telecommunication networks, software providers, cloud hosting services, infrastructure as a service. Your IT support desk can be outsourced to another thing.
Yeah.
You can host your entire platform for your business. And also, the way the world is now, that something that occurred to me in the last couple of years actually is the traditional organization. Right, I've been put right by people from 30 years ago that have told me this recently, that this isn't new in its sort of concept, but in the way it's being executed now, it is new. So a bank can now just essentially be a brand and then be supported by a whole suite of suppliers and second and third and fourth like party suppliers. And it's the way the organizations are made up are vastly different now. Like I can think of retail banks in the UK that are made up of 5 or 6 different major IT providers and software service and cloud hosting, all working independently and together at the same time. Your HR functions somewhere else being outsourced, and it's usually through some telecommunications or IT platform and sharing. So it's not just the banks themselves, but if you have any sort of involvement with providing a service to financial services, you're going to find your organization is going to start having it's going to roll downstream. Like with the OpRes stuff at the moment, there's lots of vendors that are being asked about are they involved in testing? Are they participating in testing? What does their business continuity and OpRes testing look like? And they're all sat there like, well, no one's ever asked me this before. And I think that with DORA, because of the broadening of the scope, all of a sudden, people that have set up businesses and providing to lots of different types of sectors, one of which being financial services, they're going to find themselves being asked questions that have never been asked before, as fully as perhaps they once were, as fully as ever before, sorry. And I find that I felt to me that that's really interesting. And the reason why it's important to continuity and resilience practitioners is because, well, I believe, is because a lot of what they're talking about is IT failure, IT risk, and recoverability and your incident reporting. And let's be honest, most business continuity incidents, if it's not affecting the people, it's affecting the technology or the supply or the process, all of which are technology dependencies. You're going to end up being asked questions about your incident response framework based on this.
That begs the question, we're already doing that when it comes to ISO 22301, ISO 27701, a few other standards and things that are out there already. So what's the difference with DORA then?
Yeah, I know. Well, it's so that's what prompted me to look at it a little bit, because I thought, well, what's really changing the game here? I think so. Aside from the broadening of the scope, so that, has your organization, so they're asking financial services, has your organization fully reviewed its critical ICT providers? That should be picked up in the third-party vendor program. I would have sort of do due diligence checks and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that should already be the case. The questions they might be having may be different. Now, there's been a lot of consultancies, like you only have to Google. If you start to Google now DORA, you'll see there's like podcasts, YouTube interviews, there's white papers galore everywhere. And the one thing that's really sort of making people nervous in the consultancy space at the moment seems to be that whilst they've agreed that this is something that's going to go ahead and broadly what it's going to cover, the regulatory technical standards, so that is detailed expectations as a result of the legislation, they've not been developed yet. So what happens is with the timelines in the EU Parliament is the legislation gets agreed, then they have a lead time for developing the regulatory technical standards. They do this for all EU regulations, and then you get like a lead time to implement it, like any regs, like so I think they've agreed it's a 24-month lead time to implement it, and that will be a standard gap analysis and everything. But to my earlier point, there's a lot of head scratching about, okay, are they going to mandate multi-vendor? So all of a sudden you have a concentration risk with one supplier. Is this going to ask you to, is the technical standards going to ask you to ensure that you have something in place for a multi-vendor strategy, which might not be practical for a lot of different businesses? There's gaps in your the way you respond to incidents, but certain legislations have different timelines. So you sort of GDPR in the EU currently has a certain period of time before you have to respond to. If you're not doing business with anyone else or you're new to business in that space, you may be expected to meet faster timelines than you did previously. The key thing is that I've read into is that it's coming. It's going to involve. They're going to have a deeper look into ICT as suppliers and also the inherent risk and what are we doing to mitigate the risk. One of those controls will be business continuity and disaster recovery, and they'll be asking questions about how the business continuity department and the disaster recovery teams are managing critical outsourced IT providers and what are their workaround strategies and what are their escalation for points and incident reporting flows, etc. That's a lot should already be there, but the way in which they're going to ask the questions and what they're looking for, that's not fully written down yet, and it's probably going to evolve from what we've already got. So really, the point of my looking into it was, this is widely consulted on. It's got a whole European Parliament talking about it. It's going to consolidate loads of different European regulations into one, and it's going to evolve to factor in things like technology, cryptocurrency, payment services that were never previously in place before. If you start a business and if you're a business continuity manager for just any organization, like a startup, and you have to use a payment card, and you have to link yourself up to a third party that offers payment card solutions, all of a sudden you're hooked in to the stuff. So it might be more a case of you've never previously been pulled into this, and you may well be, and you probably need to do a bit of a gap analysis and keep a watching brief on the development of this regulation.
Well, what prompted this? Because as you've already said, we've been doing some of this stuff already. Your supply chain, that's been in business continuity resilience headlines for the last 5 years or so, most definitely the last couple, as a result of the pandemic. But was there something, an event or something occurring that prompted the need for a new or another regulation?
My personal opinion is that I don't think it was any big bang event that prompted it. I think it's been a progressive evolution of the way the financial markets have developed over time. I think that, so for instance, there was a study that was done with the The IMF did it for the US financial ecosystem back in 2019. And in that, they looked at what they call FMIs, which is financial market infrastructures. And they looked at all of the sort of credit risk and capital allocation and all that stuff. But also they looked at operational risk and governance and how things were managed. And the scope of the area they were looking at, these FMIs are like clearinghouses, the central bodies that do the settlements, exchanges, things that are fundamental to the wider business as well. And one of the things they found in that paper in 2019 was that it was highly inconsistent and there wasn't much oversight and governance of it. So they've been highly dependent on like areas. These are the core pillars of the market that make things tick, and they are robust and they do get fixed when they fall down, but they haven't been, in terms of the way they manage their risk, they haven't been as closely scrutinized. And if that hasn't happened there, and you factor in what's happened in the last 10 years and the way technology has evolved to allow business to be done differently and to allow organizations to be set up differently, it creates an entirely different environment. It's so more interactive. I was going to quote the guy who's the lead for the European Parliament. Billy Keller, he was responsible for pushing the regulation out there. And when it went live, I think it was mid-May, towards the end of May this year, it says today's provisional political agreement on DORA is a key step to building the EU's cyber resilience at a point where financial services and ICT interact. So they're aiming to provide a robust ICT risk framework, testing and reporting requirement for the future-proofing the legislation, because the world is changing. And
so this is a way to try and get caught up.
Yeah. We're behind. We're behind. The questions we've been asking and the things we've been doing do not fully reflect the transformation in the market space and the way that organizations are doing business. One of the things I also think I wanted to add was operational resilience across the world. One of the things that's been asked of organizations is to mature their level of testing. So a lot of my business continuity friends have naturally gone and looked at our testing framework, and they've said, right, these are the areas of business I'm testing. These are the people I'm involving. Maybe I could bring in more third parties to the testing. How do I mature my testing? I've had quite a few people ask me that question. So what would you do? And I think business continuity managers broadly know the answer to that. They know how they're going to have to mature their testing, and they may get more funding and time for it now, hopefully, because there'll be more people asking them to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing that really gets me is with operational resilience is that, particularly in the UK, they want to see where the business becomes non-viable. So they want to see the numbers. How much money can you fail to make or lose at a point where you become non-viable? And how do you demonstrate that? And that's you can do some fictitious plane fall out of the sky scenario, but the level of maturity needs to go to really detailed. I think there's a 3-year timeline. It needs to be like data center A has been impacted, servers A, B, and C are now offline. There's a supply issue, they won't be back for X amount of time, meaning that we won't be able to fund ATMs, which means customers won't be able to get their cash from the ATMs. How much money can we afford to pay for compensation, for the fix, for the loss of business, for the people changing business? They're trying to put a number to it. And then being able to do testing to demonstrate that we can operate within that from a business context. And I think that's where the gap is and where the maturity will go in the coming years. But this will be no different. Testing is a key component of DORA, operational resilience testing. They're going to want to see maturity of how you've involved technology groups. That's whether they're completely external, whether they're internal, or whether they're like intragroup. So if you're an international organization and you've got tech teams in other regions supporting you, they're considered now by various legislation around the world as almost separate entities. They are intragroup, and you have to demonstrate the same level of due diligence and practicality as you would they be a third party. And also, let's not forget that in all organizations, not just financial services, there is a whole lot of global outsourcing in big global service centers around the world that don't strictly work for the organization and they'll be sitting on platforms that are consuming technology from the organization they've got an agreement with. And we need to factor all that in as well. So I just think that the way the world is doing business, the way that organizations are set up, more organizations are going to get pulled in to the scope of this lens. DORA is going to consolidate a whole bunch of European regulations into one big resilience lens that's going to factor in the current and new ways of working going forward. And that's going to change the way that questions are asked of them. And I just think really my reason for getting interested in it was to try and shout from the hilltops to predominantly my business continuity world, because we study a lot of what we do and disruptions and how we manage our frameworks. But there's less available, except for your channel and some other people as well. But there's less edge case learning to equip us with understanding things that will be coming. And you've just explained it before, Alex. You say that socks landed on your doorstep, and you had to think, oh, what's going on? This is another socks, essentially. And you need to, if you want to get involved and add value to the business on top of what you're already doing, you do a gap analysis on your incident reporting and your third-party relationships and your IT workarounds, and look at how that might be different going forward. There's definitely some no regrets work that could be done there for sure, I think. I don't know. Sorry, that was a lot of detail then. That was a brain dump onto you, Alex. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I had a bunch of things to ask, but you were going on. I didn't want to interrupt you.
It was all in my head, but I just think there is so much. When you start looking on LinkedIn and Google and YouTube, there's just so much free content about this. I mean, don't get me wrong. It is just a new piece of regulation. There is probably going to be a minor change in scope, and there's a lot of stuff we're already doing. But knowing it's coming, and as continuity and resilience practitioners, getting ourselves in a position to do a bit of horizon scanning and seeing where our areas are different and our landscape. I think that's really important. So,
one of the things I was thinking of, what if you're already following some sort of a regulation or a certification, and which take precedence? And I'm not saying you know the answer, or I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you've got the EU DORA regulation and you're certified doing a big chunk of that already with ISO or some of the other bodies that are out there, what takes precedence?
Well, I mean, to be honest, with the US banking in my previous life and the previous role, if you had a SOC 2 certification, you were pretty much airtight, and we'd have that would give us confidence, because vendors don't want to share. I mean, that's a whole episode in itself, how to deal with suppliers. Then some vendors that can call the shots, and they don't want to engage in your tests and scenarios, and they don't want to give you evidence or to the level you want it to satisfy your assurance that they're prepared. So the SOC 2 report is an independent review of arrangements within an organization that's supporting financial services, and that's perceived, broadly speaking, that's perceived as a sort of a badge of honor. Now, a lot of business continuity practitioners will have followed the international standards, and I think out with financial services, that will cover a lot of good ground in what's already been done. I think it will. I've found in financial services that vendors that quote that they have ISO 27001, 22301, etc., they tend to go, okay, thanks, but we want to see X. So whether you've got that or not, you may have to repeat the activity. but that's just from what I've seen in the sort of 3 or 4 banks that I've worked in. So yeah, I think if you're already at a certified level, all you'd have to perform really is a traceability matrix against what you have, which you've probably already done because you wouldn't be certified if you didn't, and what you think is coming. So I would urge people to keep a close watching eye on the DORA, because these regulations, they trickle globally and everybody will do their version, but essentially a cookie cutter of the same thing. And or they might already be doing it. Just be ready to see that in the next couple of years, this will be one of the hot topics amongst the sort of regulatory watchdogs and horizon scanning, and it is going to involve a lot more third parties than it previously did, I suspect.
One last question before we end on this one is, where is this taking us overall? In any of your investigations, did you get a hint of where this is going? Because if obviously this is trying to bring things up to current day, to meet the way businesses are doing things, and the pandemic obviously changed the way a lot of businesses are doing their operations now. If businesses are constantly changing, where could DORA be going eventually, if at all? It's only going to bring us up to a certain point, but businesses are still changing. So is there
you're right
into the future?
It's a really good point, isn't it? Because this is a stamp in time for the current environment, and if we've gone this far in 20 years, what's going to happen in the next 20 years? Like biometrics going galore into the next level. AI is going to explode. Data meshing, data is going to be, the next 10 years is all about data and monetizing that. And then obviously we've got the use cases out with financial services for cryptocurrency and blockchains, etc. And that they're trying their best to catch up with how quickly the transformation and the evolution of the wider business model has become. And I think by the time they'll get there, they'll have to take a breath and start again. To be honest, so in terms of answering your question of where they could take it to, I think, me personally, from what I've seen in the technology space, I would say that it's all focus for me is on data, because that's how we're going to make. But that's where the money is now. That's where I mean, it's always been there, but now we're starting to mobilize across businesses and technology organizations, startups. They're starting to really develop some really interesting stuff. I mean, you only have to go and read a Gartner report, like the Gartner's top 10 trending like technologies and things. You can Google that and have a look. It's absolutely mind-blowing what they think is going to happen just in the next 5 years. So I'd recommend taking a look at that. I would say they're trying to catch up with the infrastructure element at the moment and the connectivity between third parties and how they interact, because it's something that's been a bit of the poor sister of governance for a long time. And now that the next phase will, in my opinion, will probably be data, and data is king.
Okay.
But we'll see. Come back to this in 10 years' time and see.
Yeah, well, I'll ask you then. We'll see where we are. Well, any final thoughts? We've kind of come to the end of this episode. Any final thing to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I've done I did an article on LinkedIn about DORA and the perils of ignoring it, but also the reason why I put it out there is to give people a sort of a structured brain dump of the research I did, pointing to resources that are quite high level. If you want a 5-10 minute soundbite, if you've got the time, you can click through the links as you read through it's probably about 700,000 words maybe, but you can click through the various like podcasts and things I've seen and looked at, and you can get a flavor of what it is. And at least then, when your organization starts to react to this, you're already one step ahead and you haven't got to frantically Google whatever it means, because it does sound quite ominous, the Digital Operational Resilience Act. And is that different to OpRes? Are we doing the same thing? There's some groundwork that you could probably do ahead of time once the regulatory technical standards come out. and give some thought, if you're not in financial services and you do work for a technology company, or you have some involvement with a technology company that may be involved, you may need to think about how the requirements might impact you. It's just useful to know in the wider scheme of things. If financial services are doing it, my experience is that it tends to trickle into the wider sectors as well. It's just because it's where the money's being made the most, and it's the highly regulated environment gets hit first. And then fast forward 5-10 years, all of a sudden it starts featuring in contracts and service level agreements and things like that outside of banking. So one to watch, and I hope that's useful to the people that have watched this, and they can go away and have a look in their own time, and to reach out to me if they want to have a chat about it, because much like yourself, Alex, I just wanted to sort of go, oh, have you seen this? Isn't this like, is it good? Is it bad? Is it the same as what we've done before? I don't know, but I'm pointing at it because I think potentially it could be a very big fire. We'll find out soon enough.
Well, like I said before we started recording, I hadn't heard of DORA, and if I had come across it, it probably just went right over my head. Oh, another standard, and left it at that. And then when you reached out to talk about this, I went, uh-oh, I think I got to know more about this.
It's got to be the two things from us. I'll focus on business continuity, but the two takeaways are your incident reporting, how quickly you or your vendors contact the relevant parties, and the process to do that, and the time it takes to achieve that. And that's got to be pretty airtight. If it's not already, I imagine it probably will be. Mm-hmm. And then your maturity of your testing, factoring in technology in all facets of that. So, like I said, internal and external. How are you involving them? How are you factoring that in a meaningful way to demonstrate you can live within your impact tolerances? They're the two biggies for me.
And that could lead to full-time test coordinators or facilitators, or whatever that role gets called. Because
I think it already is, to be honest.
What's that?
It's in financial services, that's already happening, I think.
Yeah, well, now it could happen with everyone, because if you're a technology company, using your example, you're going to get more and more requests to participate in a bank's test or some financial institution's test, while having to prove you're doing your own tests and involved with any other parties that you're dealing with.
Yep.
Your test. So you could be increasing, not just your maturity, but your the time allotment for it as well, and the resources required.
That's absolutely right. Couldn't agree more. You put it better than me. I should have been interviewing you.
No, I wouldn't have got too far on this topic.
I hope you found it a little bit useful, but it's something a bit different to some of the stuff like your channel covers. I thought it might be add something different if people want to try and walk away with something else as well. I know James covers a lot of weird and wonderful ground in your chats, but it's another one to add to the pile.
Well, if James is watching, there may be this may be one of the links he sends me in an upcoming episode that I'll read about, and I'll actually say, hey, I know something about this one.
Yeah, good. Okay, cool.
Well, great. Thanks very much, Luke. I really appreciate you sharing your time again with us.
Yeah, no, I've loved every minute of it. I love your channel, and it's great to see you're so accessible to a lot of practitioners. It doesn't feel like some kind of exclusive ivory tower. Anybody who wants to talk with Alex and do this can. And if anyone is watching this, whatever stage you're at in your career, whatever you do, if you've got something you want to talk about, I fully suspect, I don't want to add more work to you, Alex, but I fully suspect your door's open.
There isn't even a door. I'm willing to talk to anybody, because the way I see it, everyone has different experiences. We all have different backgrounds. So even someone who's just started is going to come in with whole brand new, fresh ideas and new viewpoints that I may never have experienced after 25 years. So I'm more than willing to talk to anybody.
You must have a lot of light bulb moments in all the chats that you have.
Oh yeah, there's quite a few of them. Quite a few of them. And they continue to happen, which I love. So
awesome.
So thanks very much, Luke, and to everybody listening and watching. Stay prepared, everybody.
If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.